Hey, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again, coming at you with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We're going to do our sixth episode today, sixth chapter of the second book today, which will get us about a quarter of the way through this second book. We kind of left off on a cliffhanger, and we're in the middle of this battle, which was going really well, more than half the forces, and then Graces realizes, it is all a trap. Shocker. So let's find out what happens. Stay a while and listen. Malfurion sensed something amiss even as his spell took full effect. The plants had been all too pleased to be a part of his desire, for they found the demons an abhorrence. With silent coaxing, he made them expand to lengths far greater than normal, then manipulated them so that they were more like the squirming, seeking tentacles of a kraken than simply roots. By doing so, he had enabled the soldiers to slay many of the demons. But from another point far from the battle, his heightened senses detected a wrongness which he realized had to be a protective spell. Without opening his eyes, Malfurion reached out and discovered that the source lay not anywhere on the ground, but rather high above, in the clouds. Still seeing what the powers taught him by Cenarius, the druid delved into the cloud cover and sought what attempted to be hidden. I don't know that druids have like an eagle eye kind of thing like shamans do, but maybe. And in his mind, Malfurion saw hundreds of airborne demons. They were Doomguard for the most, so many that Malfurion could only assume that they had been gathered from other parts of the Horde just for this. With their savage weapons and horrific faces, they were terrible to behold. Alone, they would be a terrible enough foe to confront. Even more unnerving, however, were those that flew among them. There were Eredar warlocks, scores of them. They had no wings, but kept aloft through spells. Watching them, Malfurion knew that some kept the illusion consistent, while others already sought out weaknesses in the Night Elven forces. But as terrible as all this was, what soared toward the battle from behind the Doomguard and Eredar shook Malfurion the most. As if launched by 1,000 catapults, huge and fiery rocks descended with terrible precision through the clouds. The druid pressed harder, avoiding the warlock senses as best he could, and saw the missiles for what they truly were: infernals. Eyes snapping open, Malfurion shouted to any who could hear, "Beware the skies! They attack us from the skies!" He caught Lord Star-Eye's attention briefly, but the noble simply sniffed his direction, then focused again on the demon's decimated ranks. Malfurion pushed his mount forward and seized one of the sentinels. "Sound the warning! The demons attack us through the clouds!" But the soldier only looked at him in befuddlement, not understanding. The illusion above still held, and any who looked upward surely thought the druid mad. Finally, Malfurion saw another who seemed to understand. Krasis crossed his field of vision, the mysterious and pale mage seeming frantic about something. As their gazes met, both realized that the other understood. Krasis pointed not at Ravencrest, but rather at Illidan. Malfurion nodded, catching his meaning immediately. The druid had to warn one of the few who could react quickly to the threat above. "Illidan!" Malfurion shouted, standing in the saddle in the hopes that his twin would see him. Illidan, though, was far too caught up in his spells to notice anything. Concentrating, Malfurion asked the wind to aid him. When it agreed, he had it concentrate its efforts. Guiding it with his finger, the druid rubbed his own cheek twice. His brother abruptly touched his cheek in turn, the wind having imitated Malfurion's touch. Illidan glanced over his shoulder and saw his twin. Pointing skyward, Malfurion made a warning expression. Illidan almost turned away, but Malfurion grew angry and glared. His brother finally looked up. At that moment, the first of the demons dropped through the illusion. The Eredar struck the moment that they were visible, casting spells in unison that swept over the Night Elves' lines. Heavy droplets fell upon the soldiers, causing no major concern until the first began burning through armor and flesh. Cries arose from those struck as the shower became a monstrous downpour. Night Elves fell writhing as their faces were seared away. Malfurion spoke with the wind again, asking it to blow the torrent away from his people. As he did, he sensed Illidan and the Moonguard casting their own spells. One of the warlocks exploded with a shriek, one of the Doomguard nearby also perishing. However, when the Night Elven sorcerers sought to slay others, their attacks were met by an invisible shield. The strong wind summoned by the druid pushed away the horrendous downpour, but the damage had already been done. The defenders' lines faltered. Then the infernals began dropping. The initial wave did not reach the earth. Two exploded, and several more suddenly bounced against empty air, soaring in random directions away from the Night Elves. A bolt of blue lightning cut through 1, 2, 3 demons in rapid succession, but despite the efforts of the sorcerers, the wizards, and the druid, too many of the infernals descended. One struck the center of the already ravaged line with catastrophic results. A dozen catapults filled with explosive powders could have done only a fraction of the havoc the single demon did. Like leaves in the wind, the Night Elves were tossed about. The shock of the strike sent others tumbling to the ground, where the Felguard quickly and viciously dispatched them. More infernals struck in rapid succession. All order fled the defenders' front. Worse, each massive demon who landed then rose from the steaming craters that they had created and began barreling through the Night Elves. The powerful roots that Malfurion had summoned proved ineffectual against the skull-faced infernals, who ripped through them as if they were nothing. By the scores, the fiery behemoths pounded the Night Elves, wreaking mayhem wherever they moved. Then, a lance lost by a fallen soldier rose into the air just before one infernal. Blazing blue, it suddenly shot toward the demon at a speed that made even the infernal appear sluggish. As it flew with unerring accuracy at the demon, the lance grew, its head transforming into a sharp, almost needle-like point. It skewered the one infernal with such ease that the demon did not at first realize he was dead. The behemoth gaped, then twitched madly. His forward momentum ceased as the lance, propelled by magic, continued to drive ahead. As if no heavier than an infant, the huge infernal was dragged backward. The lance continued to speed up, catching another infernal just as he emerged from the crater. The demon had time only to stare wide-eyed before it too was impaled. Its swiftness not in the least decreasing, the magical spear caught a third infernal unaware. Only then did its momentum cease, and the missile and its victims dropped among the dead. From Malfurion's side, Ronan, his brow furrowed, nodded his satisfaction. But just when it appeared that the defenders might turn the battle again, horns sounded from the north. "The Legion!" Krasus shouted. "They come from the other side!" The full, awful truth now lay revealed. As if rising from the earth itself, an immense horde emerged from the north and fell upon the soldiers there. Like those above, they had been hidden by a spell. Now they swarmed like ants. The Night Elves fought valiantly, but their already damaged lines buckled under the new onslaught. The demons had planned their trap well, relying much on the arrogance of the Night Elves. What Ravencrest had seen as a minor skirmish, an easy victory with which to stoke the courage of his troops, had been instead a costly, sinister trick. "We've got to retreat," Ronan said. "It's the only way at this point." At first it appeared that Lord Ravencrest would not do what needed to be done. No signal to retreat came, even though the demons pressed hard. Infernals continued to drop upon the Night Elves and the Eridar, some protecting the others, cast one vile spell after another. Malfurion and his companions could no longer attack. They had to do everything they could simply to deflect most of the Warlock's assaults. Even the Moonguard could do little but shield the battered host. Finally, the horns called out for retreat. The Burning Legion gave no quarter, though, and each step back was bought with more blood. "This attrition is too great," Krasus hissed, joining the druid. "We must create a gap between us and them." "But how?" asked Malfurion. The slim mage's expression grew darker yet. "We must cease trying to fight the Eridar and concentrate only on keeping the main force of the demons from us." "But the warlocks will strike hard while we do that. They'll slay countless soldiers." "And more will perish if we move at the snail's pace." Krasus spoke the truth, however much the druid did not wish to hear it. The Felguard whittled away at the Night Elves left and right, constantly cutting at whatever foe lay within reach. The Eridar, on the other hand, needed time to cast their spells, and while those also did terrible damage overall, they now did less than the blades of their comrades. "You must tell your brother to do as we do," the mage instructed. "He won't listen to me, not for that." It had been trouble enough to make Illidan look up. To convince him to do as Krasus desired would take far too long, if it was even possible. "I'll do it," Ronan offered. "He may listen to me better." In truth, Illidan looked up to the human. Ronan knew how to cast spells even Malfurion's twin could not yet handle. Illidan almost saw him as a Shondo. "Do what you can, then," Krasus said to Ronan. As the fire-tressed wizard rode off, Malfurion asked, "What do we do?" "Anything that separates them from us." The druid had hoped for more, but he understood that Krasus did not wish to overly guide him. They would work best if each did what they felt was most comfortable. The ways of the elder mage were not necessarily those of Malfurion. Without waiting to see what the Night Elf would attempt, Krasus gestured toward the battle. At first, Malfurion could not tell what he did, but then he noticed the foremost demon seemed to shrink a foot or two. Only after a moment more did he see that they struggled with a sudden bog that had opened up beneath their feet. Those behind them clustered together, trying to battle through to the other side. Rather than trying to attack again, the Night Elves wisely continued their retreat, but Krasus had only managed to aid one area of the battle. In others, Malfurion saw that the demons continued to cut down the defenders. He immediately reached out and spoke to the plants again, asking that they give of themselves their roots once more. They knew the dire developments and were aware that once the Night Elves left, they and all other life would be purged by the Legion. Nevertheless, they freely offered what they could. Tears rolling down his eyes at this sacrifice, Malfurion carefully crafted his spell. The roots came up in even greater clusters than previously, becoming a veritable forest in reverse. The demons hacked away at the strong tendrils. Even the infernals were finally slowed. The druid felt each cut into the roots, but his spell had the effect that he had intended. More and more the night elves pulled away from their devious foe. An unexpected reprieve came in the south in the form of night saber riders. Malfurion had forgotten about the force sent earlier by Ravencrest. Their numbers were smaller than he recalled, though they fought with no less fury. Several of the Panthers had wounds already, and more than one rider looked battered, but still they cut into the Burning Legion, buying precious seconds for those comrades on foot. "The north!" Krasis shouted. "Focus on the north!" Although they could not physically see the struggle in the north, both Malfurion and the mage had other methods by which to observe it. Reaching out, the druid sought birds or winged insects. He found none of the former, but still a few of the latter. Even the smallest fauna understood that to stay near the demons was to invite death. Yet the beetles he came across, already in the process of fleeing, agreed to be his eyes. Through their peculiar field of vision, the druid soon viewed the other end of the struggle. What he saw made his heart sink. In even more vast numbers than he had ever seen them, the Burning Legion poured over the soldiers. The dead lay scattered everywhere. Faces too much like his own stared sightlessly in horror at what had slain them. Fell beasts tossed the dead around, while other demons eagerly sought to add to the piles. Malfurion looked for some creature or plant that he could use, but only the beetles seemed present. A breeze blew one of the insects about, finally giving the druid an idea. Speaking with the wind through the beetle, he first told it how much he admired its forceful gale, then convinced it to show him more. The wind responded obligingly, creating a dust devil. With more urging by Malfurion, the dust devil grew larger and larger, soon dwarfing the huge demons. As it swelled in size, its intensity also increased 100-fold. When it had grown powerful enough, the druid directed its force against the demons in the forefront. The Burning Legion ignored the fierce wind at first. That is, until it engulfed the first few and threw them to their deaths. Those nearest then scattered, but now they were pursued by a full-fledged tornado. Malfurion felt no pity for the demons and hoped that they would soon be joined by many of their comrades. "Do not grow overconfident," came Krasis' voice. "Our tactics have bought the army time, but nothing more." The druid did not have to be told that, but he said nothing. The night elves were in no state to turn events around. All that Malfurion and the other spellcasters had done simply enabled the soldiers to survive. Not satisfied that he had done enough, Malfurion sought through the beetle's eyes anything else that might be of use against the demons. The insects fluttered bravely over the Burning Legion, giving him 5 views simultaneously. Surely there had to be something. That the druid screamed as something seized one of the beetles and crushed the life from it. 2 of the survivors immediately fluttered away, but the remaining pair turned, giving the shaking night elf a glimpse at what had killed the hapless insect. In the midst of the demons stood a dark-skinned figure who towered over the rest of the Burning Legion. He strode like a giant among his children, calmly directing the fearsome warriors in their monstrous efforts. Vaguely, he reminded Malfurion of the Eridar, but was as much above them as they were above the Infernals. He wore elaborate shoulder armor and surveyed the violent battlefield with analytical indifference. From his right hand, the massive demon dropped the bits of shell that were all that remained of the beetle, then stared directly at one of those still being used by Malfurion, and into the druid's mind. "So, you are the one." An intense pressure filled Malfurion's head. He felt as if his brain was expanding, pressing against his skull. Malfurion tried to call out for help, but his mouth would not work. In desperation, he sought the aid of anything near the demons, something that would distract the druid's attacker before it was too late. Deep within the earth, something stirred. The rocks themselves, the eldest and hardiest of living forms, woke from their eternal slumber. They touched Malfurion with anger at first, for few things mattered to them more than their sleep, but the druid quickly focused their attention on what lay in the wake of the Burning Legion's rampage, pointing especially to the landscape itself. Few there were who understood that rock lived, much less had any sense of the world. Now those he had awakened discovered the awful truth about the demons, that even the earth itself could not escape death at their hands. The foul magic that was an inherent part of the demons killed everything. Nothing, no matter how deeply buried, ever escaped. And that fate included even the rocks. Those that lay buried behind the Burning Legion lacked any sentience whatsoever. Their life essences had been destroyed as readily as the blades of the Felguard killed night elves. Malfurion fell to one knee as the demon's attack squeezed his skull tight. It became impossible to think. The druid started to black out. The ground rumbled. Malfurion dropped to both knees. Oddly, the pressure in his head now decreased. Through the eyes of the beetles, he watched with astonishment as crevices opened up all around the monstrous figure who had attacked him. A smaller demon nearby tumbled into one fissure, which promptly shut on him. Other demons scattered from the area, leaving their gigantic leader to his own defenses. The indifferent look never left the face of Malfurion's foe, but it was clearly all he could do to keep from falling into one of the many increasingly vast chasms surrounding him. The sinister Colossus reached out toward one of the beetles, but Malfurion immediately ordered both remaining creatures away. As they retreated, the druid saw the demon draw a circle around himself, an immense green sphere formed, protecting its occupant from the savage quake. It hovered above the chaos, even as other lesser demons spilled into the new ravines. The deep, monstrous orbs watched in turn the retreating forms. I will know you, insect. He did not refer to the beetles, but rather Malfurion. As his foe dwindled from sight, the druid realized that he too would recognize the demon when next they met. Already Malfurion suspected he knew by what name to call him, for surely this could only be one of the horrific commanders of the monstrous horde. Surely this could only be Archimond. Hands seized him by the shoulder, breaking his link to the beetles. Instinctively, Malfurion expected to be torn apart by some other demon, but the hands were gentle, and the voice soft and caring. I have you, Malfurion, Tyrande whispered in his ears. He could only nod. Vaguely noticing that he was no longer seated atop his lightsaber, Malfurion wondered what had become of the animal. Tyrande gently drew him up onto her own mount. Showing surprising strength, she hefted him in front of her, then urged the massive feline on. Heart still pounding, Malfurion caught bits and pieces of the catastrophe as the priestess of Elune carried him off. Hundreds of soldiers trudged quickly over the rolling landscape as far in the background demons pursued them. In several places, flames rose between the forces, and here and there an explosion caused by some spell was punctuated by screams. Whether night elf or demon, he could not say. Once Malfurion witnessed the personal banner of Lord Ravencrest flutter by, but he saw no sign of the noble himself. Faces passed across his vision as the lightsaber brought Tyrande and him to safety. Gone from the soldiers was the look of expectant triumph. In its place, a terrible truth could now be witnessed. It was very possible that the Night Elves might lose this struggle. He must have moaned upon seeing this, for Tyrande leaned close to him, his ear, whispering, Never fear, Malfurion. I'll attend to your wounds the moment we can pause. The druid managed to twist around and see her face. Much of it was hidden behind the war helmet of the sisterhood. The rest was covered in grime and blood. From the determination with which Tyrande moved, Malfurion gathered the blood was not hers. It startled him to think that she had likely gotten closer to the heart of the battle than he had. He had always thought her calling a more gentle one, even with the armor. Tyrande, the druid finally managed. The others? I've seen Broxigar, the wizards, and your brother all. Even the erstwhile Captain Shadowsong, who guides them like a protective herder. She said the last with an all too brief smile. Ravencrest, he is still master of Blackrock Hold. So even after many losses, the core strength behind the host remained intact. Still, neither Ravencrest nor his many spellcasters had been able to prevent the disaster. Tyrande. Hush, Malfurion. It amazes me that you can still speak, considering all that has happened to you. He understood the intensity of the mental assault Archimond had thrust at him, but did not know how she could have sensed it. The priestess suddenly held him close. While Malfurion welcomed her touch gladly, he did not like the anxiousness he felt. Elune must have truly watched over you. So many ripped apart around you, even your own mount stripped bare, a horrific tangle of flesh and bone, and you barely marked. Ripped apart, his own lightsaber torn to pieces? What had happened around him? Why had he not noticed the butchery? How had he survived all that in addition to the mental attack? The very notion of the terrible spectacle that had taken place unnoticed around him made him shiver. Malfurion had no answers to his questions, but he did understand one thing. He had survived what had been thrown at him by one of the archdemons. On the one hand, he could be grateful for the miracle. On the other, he was aware that he had now been marked by Archimond. They would meet again. That was almost assured. And when they did, Malfurion knew the Demon Lord would do his best to make certain that next time there would be no escape. All right, guys. Another chapter in the pipes 5x5. Yeah, it was a rout. We knew it was going to be. That was kind of something. That's an interesting little twist there about them. Somehow he did some kind of assault that destroyed everyone around him. That's interesting. This is one of the rare times that we spend all of our time of a chapter on one thing as well. I think it was kind of shorter because of that. All right, guys, we'll find out what happens as they continue to flee, and probably going to have to consolidate their powers. And I would guess we're going to have some words from Neltharion soon too, and that's going to be even more negative. As always, thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Lore of